words. I get cool sculpting from Ideal Image, the advanced med spa, because on top of working out and trying, the cool sculpting really does help with those problem areas.
Wait, explain what cool sculpting is.
It's a FDA-cleared fat freezing technology, and it uses cooling to safely and effectively remove unwanted fat.
Amazing. I can't see around this concrete column.
That's what it's like relying on checking your credit to protect you from identity theft. You get a limited view.
Oh, looks beautiful.
You might detect credit changes, but you can miss threats, like someone getting an online payday loan in your name or selling your personal information on the dark web.
See what? The concrete?
With LifeLock, you can see more. We use proprietary technology to detect a range of identity threats, and if you have a problem, a U.S.-based identity restoration specialist will work to fix it. No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but LifeLock can alert you to threats you could miss.
You are killing me.
Memberships start at $9.99 a month plus applicable taxes. Now get 10% off. Go to LifeLock.com and enter promo code NEWS. That's promo code NEWS. LifeLock. More detection, more protection.
From the Online Trading Academy studio, this is AM 770 KTTH.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the only morning show you need to get you through your commute, get you set up for the day and the week and weekend to come. You're listening to the Jason Rancho online at KTTH.com. We've got a lot to get to and only 1 hour left to do it. Megan McCain smacked down Michael Wolff, the Snohomish County Republican, says he has a fix for the opioid crisis. And Google seems to be targeting conservative outlets with a fact-checking tool while giving liberal outlets a complete pass. We're going to get into that and so much more. But first, it's time to get you working the right way with Right Way Traffic, brought to you by the Online Trading Academy.
Slowly, progress is being made, but boy, we're going to have a late commute today. Snoqualmie Path still closed because of snow. Too many accidents have been out. No ETA for reopening. And they cleared the accident in Bellevue that had a couple lanes southbound 405 at 520 compromised, but this backup is solid all the way into Bothell. It's also heavy both directions of I-90 between 405 and I-5, westbound 90 coming out of Issaquah, westbound 520 coming out of Bellevue to 405. Both directions of 520, the floater between Bellevue and I-5, and southbound 5 slow from just before the Swamp Creek interchange down to at least downtown Seattle. Still extremely heavy coming up North 5 and North 167 from 18 to 405. That's AM 770 KTTH traffic.
Attend a free Online Trading Academy workshop. Text the word back up to the number 57682 and register for ongoing Bellevue workshops and a Mount Vernon workshop happening on Wednesday, January 24th at 1 o'clock and again at 5:30 p.m. There's a lot of news happening all around the world and right here at home. It's time to find out what's trending. What's trending at home? This is an interesting story. Sound Transit and Urbanists at all costs are deceiving Washington taxpayers. We already know that, right? They are bilking us out of dollars thanks to the passage of ST3. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they want to stuff their coffers at a transportation agency that frequently delivers projects that are over budget when they actually finish them because they're usually over schedule. So now, even Democrats are acknowledging that the way that they decided to calculate our car tab fees with ST3 is unfair. They're not going to do much about it, but they are acknowledging that it's really, really, really expensive. Now, when we voted for ST3, no one knew that they were going to use the old calculations that the state put in place beforehand to determine the value of our cars. What I love about this, some people are like, oh yeah, I knew that they were going to use this calculation. No, they didn't. They're lying. Anyone who tells you that they knew that they were using this calculation are totally lying to you. The only ones who knew this were the Sound Transit activists who wrote the bill. And they did it in a way, and they promoted it in a way that would get us to think that we would at least get a fair market value on our car when tabulating the car tab fee. So no one knew that this was happening, and so now a lot of you are getting hit with sticker shock. Some of you are paying hundreds extra for vehicles that are really, really old, that have thousands and thousands and thousands of miles on them, and a lot of you can't actually afford it. At least you can't afford it in one sitting. But never fear. Democrats are here. They are pretending to have a little bit of a fix. State Representative Christine Reeves, the Democrat from Federal Way, she's introduced a bill that allows you to pay your car tab fees in installments over the course of a year. So rather than spend the $300 in one sitting in one payment, you can do it over the course of the year. Now, you're going to get hit with a $5 fee every single time you pay that installment. So understand, you're going to be spending more money in the long term than you otherwise would in the short term. But just think about for a moment the message that a bill like this sends. The fees that they've hit you with are so exorbitant, are so completely unfair, that it would burden a good portion of the populace in Western Washington if they paid it all up front. Does that seem like a reasonable message that's being sent? Does that seem like a fair message that's being sent? The bill is undoubtedly well-intentioned. I don't think Christine Reeves is trying to screw people out of those extra $5 each installment plan. It's just the system and how it is. I think her bill is well-intentioned, but all it does is postpone the pain that a lot of you are going to feel having to spend this unnecessary money to fund a bunch of projects that won't be done on time and won't be done under budget. Now, these same progressive activists who are saying, oh, suck it up and pay. You're making the choice to drive a car. This is on you. Those same people scream at the top of their lungs about the injustice of student loan debt, about the rents being too damn high, about taxes being passed that are regressive, and yet they will happily collect car tap fees that were passed in an incredibly dishonest way. They're just going to decide to slowly bleed the money from you. Oh, how compassionate they are. We'll see whether or not this thing passes. It does seem to have some support of Democrats in Olympia. We'll get you an update when we have it. Let's find out what else is trending.
What's trending? Big picture.
So Michael Wolff is still doing the interview rounds. He's now doing like the B-list of shows. He's the author of Fire and Fury, the book that is incredibly anti-Trump. It's entertaining. I'm enjoying reading it from an entertainment perspective, but it's clearly a hit piece on the Trump administration. And a lot of people are pointing out that it's a hit piece because it's improperly sourced. He uses off-the-record conversations that he reprints. He quotes people without actually having any ounce of honesty in it because they're all like, I didn't say that at all. What are you talking about? And so he was on The View. Meghan McCain, is she a permanent co-host of this?
I see her so much now.
Right,
she's
okay.
got to be, yeah.
So she's one of the women on the panel. Anna Navarro's there. Whoopi Goldberg was there. I think Joy Behar was there. She didn't talk during the portion.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she did. She tried to do a little bit of a defense of Michael Wolff during all of this halfway through the second part of the interview. But Meghan McCain just goes right after, and he is asking for it so badly. He goes right after Michael Wolff.
You know, Michael, your credibility is being questioned. Trump says the book is full of lies, misrepresentation.
Let's remember
Let me finish,
who my credibility is being questioned.
He should have let her finish, is all I'm going to say.
Credibility is being questioned.
New York Times, Maggie Haberman, New York Times, John Martin, David Brooks, CNN's Alison Camerata, Tony Blair, Tom Barak, Kate Walsh, Anna Wintour, all denying quotes. Washington Post reporter Mark Berman was in the Four Seasons, the same time as Ivanka Trump. You admitted to mixing up Mark with Mike Berman. Trump needed the Constitution explained to him. His advisor, Stan Nunberg, has fabricated stories in the past. This goes on and on. The age of the White House communications director. There are a lot of factual errors in here. So I want to know from you is, what do you say to the people?
I regret mixing up Mike Berman and Mark Berman. The Berman brothers are have my apologies.
He just laughs it off, which is such a dumb move unless you realize the only people who are excited about this book are the ones who don't give a sweet damn whether or not you're making quotes up. They don't care. This is pornography for the left. This all that it is. It's just like pornography, where you end up watching something, you're like, I've never had an experience like that, but I'm really entertained by the experience that we're pretending is an accurate reflection of our sex lives. That's exactly what this is here. We are pretending that this is an accurate reflection of what's been going on in the White House because he uses some nuggets of truth. And there are some nuggets of truth here. But when you have so many people coming out and saying, that didn't happen at all, I was there, what you just said is just dramatically untrue. When you've got enough of that going on, well, you know, we're willfully ignoring the truth about this book, which is it's just a hit piece.
I read your book, and I think this hits a special place for me because my family has been the subject of a book like this, Game Change. And Game Change was written, ironically, people like Anna were asked, and thank you for not giving interviews to those guys, A lot of staffers give what traditionally in situations like this, it's the disgruntled staffers who aren't loyal to their principal that give interviews like this. So I'm curious, when you talk about staff, you didn't talk to his cabinet. Did you ever interview Jared and Ivanka? And how can I trust some of these quotes when, again, Tony Blair, Tom Barack, Kate Walsh, Anna Wintour, all these people are denying these quotes and stories attributed to them?
I think you have to look at also the other people who are not denying, and actually the great number of people.
But isn't that just a pivot? No one's asking about the people who aren't denying anything. You've got a whole bunch of people who are denying it. So just answer that. I mean, are they lying or are you lying?
Well,
someone's lying.
This was also a thing. Roy Moore. I don't think he specifically did it, but it might have been his wife or someone like that. People would ask about the accusers, and then he would say, well, there's a lot of women that aren't accusing me of anything. So it's not really an answer.
I mean, it's an answer to a question that's not being asked, right? I mean, and there's room to have that conversation. I think there's room to have the conversation about what Steve Bannon is not denying, although he is denying the accuracy of the book. But that's not what the question is. And he's just pivoting because the truth is he used a conversation that was off the record in this book. And when someone is talking off the record, if you're talking to a reporter, particularly if you're someone like Steve Bannon or anyone who wants to give off the impression that they're really important, they can sometimes make things up so that they can seem more interesting and well-connected than they actually are, because they know once it is on the record, no one's going to actually call them out. Can we just stop this already? It seems absolutely ridiculous.
I'm not saying that they aren't idiots for honestly letting you around and giving you that kind of access, because quite frankly, had you invited me to your house at any point before this book, I would have said, hell no, of course not. I don't go to journalist's house and start dishing about anything private in the political circles I'm in. I'm just confused. Were you friends with Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes beforehand, and you were like, come to my house for an off-the-record dinner, and then you reported on it, or was it on the record?
No, a fair question, and I'll tell you what happened. This was actually an off-the-record dinner. But two things happened.
That's why people hate journalists, by the way. It's why I don't believe in the concept of off-the-record, this right here.
Okay, so, yes, I would always be careful about that. But at any rate, with Roger Ailes' death...
Always be careful about talking to him off the record.
It seemed to me that was that in off the record died with the death of the source.
That's not how it works.
That's number one. Still, Steve Bannon understood it was off the record, but not long after Roger died, Steve said to me, "You're going to put that on the record, aren't you? You're going to use that. That was history."
I question the veracity of that statement. I do. But I'd like to hear from Steve Bannon. But does it all matter? Does this really matter? The answer is no. Right? The answer is no. The people who like the book, they like the book because they want to believe it. The people who hate the book because they don't want to believe it. And that's just the fact of fire and fury. You're listening to The Jason Ranch Show. When we come back, it would appear that Google is trying to go after conservative websites. We'll find out with Eric Lieberman of the Daily Caller News Foundation. But first, it's time to get to work the right way with Right Way Traffic.
This may be the morning commute that never ends. Snoqualmie Pass still closed due to snow. In Bellevue, they've cleared the wreck that had both the express toll lanes blocked from southbound 405 at 520, but traffic is still stop and go from the Swamp Creek interchange. Now we've got a new problem, a wreck in Des Moines on southbound 5 approaching Military, and oddly enough, there's a big backup behind that, even though that's the reverse commute. A fresh crash on eastbound 90 approaching East Mercer Way, blocking the right lane, keeping you stop and go from the east end of the Mount Baker Tunnel. An Auburn wreck on the shoulder, but causing problems northbound 167 after 15th. A stall on the shoulder northbound 167 approaching 405. That backup starting to go away. And a new problem, an accident blocking the carpool lane on eastbound 520 approaching Montlake Boulevard has you slow from I-5. An accident blocking 2 lanes in Seattle on Roosevelt Way southbound at 65th is slowing traffic from 75th. Another accident reported on eastbound 512 in Puyallup. This would be our third of the day, this one approaching Woodlawn Avenue. And in Tacoma, a wreck on eastbound 16 at Center Street, blocking the right lane, things heavy from Jackson. Staples keeps your ink stocked and your business moving this year. Right now, buy 1 HP ink at the second off at 30%, ends 113. That's AM 770 KTTH traffic.
A lot of people are remodeling
Japan. I deserve a raise.
See, that's why you're never going to be in charge of anyone under the age of, like, I don't know, 30.
Text in at 78592. What would it be like?
I saw that, that's when I realized this was a book I could write. It was more than just like a labor to explain to white America what race was, that it was indeed something, you know, that could benefit everyone, and that we really did have a communication issue.
Do you think that the conversation today is fundamentally different? And when did that new conversation start to happen?
I think it needs to be fundamentally different. And I think part of the problem is, in fact, that it isn't. Some of the conversation is the same. When we look economically, right, at where people of color stand in this country, specifically Black and Latinx people and Indigenous people of color, there is actually very little economic progress been made since we were talking about this in the 50s and the 60s, and that's shocking and alarming. But what we're still talking about oftentimes are what does it look like when the Klan comes to your neighborhood, or what does it look like when these things happen. But the way that race functions in society as a system is much more subtle. It's just as deadly, but much more subtle. And we don't update that conversation. And that's part of the reason why when someone says this was racist, people immediately go, what do you mean? I'm not a Klan member. I'm not burning crosses, because we haven't updated that conversation to look at how race functions in this country. And part of why I wanted to write this book was because we need to start looking at the system. We need to set aside things like intention. Because before, when we could say, oh, it's just these men riding in horses, you know, actually trying to terrorize communities with burning crosses, we could say they are filled with hate. That is why they are bad. That is why they are harming people. I am not these people. Intention has very little to do with the system. And even then it had very little to do. Even then, what was actually oppressing Black people in this country was not these people riding around on horses. They were, I would say, maybe enforcers. You know, they were there to kind of keep that terror high. But it was actually the systems of who could vote, who couldn't, who could own property, who couldn't, who could, you know, live in certain areas of town and who couldn't. Those systems were what maintained it. And we still live in a world where the system, if you do nothing, will continue on as it is. And that's why we have to get beyond whether or not you love people of color or not, whether or not you want to be racist or not, and see, where do I interact with a system of white supremacy, and where can I start making changes in my day-to-day life to dismantle it?
That includes parenting. And I think we have a real chance, especially parents of young children, to try and raise our children with the knowledge, or at least, I don't know how to put it into words, that's why you're here, Ijeoma. I want to raise a child that doesn't realize her white privilege when she's 32. I want her to know from a very young age, now that she's 4 and she knows what race is, to change that as she grows up. So talk to me about parenting as a mother too.
I think it is incredibly important that we realize that this is a burden that must be shared until it's lifted from everyone, and that includes children. I was talking a few months back with someone about, they had asked me what it was like to raise my kids and have to have these difficult conversations about being safe around police and things like this. And he said to me, you know, I'm so glad I don't have to have this conversation with my kid. And I stopped and I said, why don't you? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, if I have to have this conversation with my kid, and your kid is in community with my kid, why does your kid not need to have this conversation? Why do they not need to know what their friends and classmates are going through? Why would you be glad that they are spared from being upset from the reality of life for my kid? It starts young. When you say, you know, and I say this to my son as well, you know, there was some Islamophobia in our neighborhood after the election, and I was talking to my 10-year-old who has some friends that are Muslim, and we were talking about these messages, and I said, you know, can you imagine for a moment what your friends must be feeling right now? The fact that you don't have to feel that every day means that there's something wrong, and you know, you need to stand up for your friends. Let them know you're there for them. And, you know, you need to understand that something very wrong is happening to them. Even if it's not hitting you, it should feel bad, because these are your friends and these are people you care about. You know, you need to look out for them. And I told him, I said, you know, you don't have to worry about someone saying this to you, which means you have more time and energy to stop someone when they're saying something like this.
So it's not being so protective over your child's psyche that you have to talk about race, you have to talk about Islamophobia and uncomfortable topics like that, even at a young age.
Definitely. Get them to look outside of themselves. And it's also empowering, because I think we forget that our children actually see this going on.
Oh, yeah.
They see the news, they hear the radio, they see kids at school repeating what their parents are saying around the dinner table, and they don't have a context for it, and it can feel very disempowering. And so if instead you are actively talking to them, explaining to them, and then telling them what they can do to help their friends and make the little space where they have a little bit of power, their classroom, their friend circle, a little better, then they feel more empowered. We forget, these are the leaders of the future, which means they're shaping their own little environments. And as they grow into adulthood, they will be shaping the world. And you start young at teaching them how to take control and to feel like they do have the power to speak up.
And I suppose that goes to, a final question I had for you, because we're talking to people who are sitting in their cars on their way to school, on their way to work, thinking, okay, what can I do today to fulfill what Ijeoma is trying to do with her book, So You Want to Talk About Race? What are some things you want people to think about and make a habit on a daily basis?
I would say it's important to remember this doesn't have to be that deep, right? Especially from the beginning. You don't have to dive in, give up all of your worldly goods, and dedicate your life to this. But you can do something as simple as, if you're a parent and PTA meetings are at 9 a.m., which for some reason in a lot of schools they are, you can ask, how does this keep a segment of the population that is more likely to not be able to get off of work at this time from being involved in their child's education, right? You can ask, how come these letters aren't coming home in multiple languages? You can ask, city council members who want your vote, what they are doing about police reform, what they're doing about income diversity in neighborhoods, what they're doing to increase low-income housing, where their priorities are for this. When you're sitting in a meeting and you notice that people of color are raising their hands to speak and being looked over, think it's probably less risky for me to be the person to speak up and say, hey, I think Janice had a question, right? Day in and day out, even in deciding what books to buy for your children, what movies to take them to, saying, questioning, how come there aren't any characters of color? How come my child doesn't think a superhero can be anything other than white? And see what you can do with your money and your time to rectify it. Those sorts of things, day in and day out. I like to say, look at your day and say, what was really easy for me today? And then think, who is it probably less easy for? Now, what can I do to change that?
Ijeoma Oluo is the author of So You Want to Talk About Race, which comes out next week. You can find our whole conversation on the Ross Files podcast. 8:23, that's time for real-time traffic, brought to you by Wrench Mobile Mechanic.
Page horizontally, because it doesn't show up unless you can see the whole sidebar to the right. Also, I've heard that different browsers may not show it, and I'm still trying to figure out which ones show it and which ones don't. But I would say about 90% of the people I've spoken to and the people in my office could see it.
So they clearly, it would appear that there's some sort of bias here. Now, let's assume that there is that kind of bias. Is this kind of fact-checking worth it if that bias did not exist?
Well, that's a great question, because even some left-leaning publications like Gizmodo, which is the former Gawker conglomerate, they admit that this is kind of a weird module to have. I mean, this widget isn't very accurate in many respects, both for our articles and other conservative publications that I've spoken to. And they weirdly format it so that it seems like different claims are made, and it even claims that the claim that they're fact-checking was claimed by us, but then they link to something totally different. So even if it wasn't partisan, it still is very sloppily done. And you would hope that Google wouldn't unroll an initiative without making sure it's perfect. I mean, they're exploring areas of technology like robots and other stuff like that. You think they would try to make sure that their programs that are more basic aren't faulty before they start exploring other areas to invest.
If you're just joining me, I'm talking with Eric Lieberman. He's the tech and law reporter over at the Daily Caller. They're taking issue with a fact-check mechanism within the Google world on their browser, but also, if you have the Chrome browser, it'll show up as well, that when you look up certain conservative outlets, you are getting some sort of an alert that indicates that they're not necessarily trustworthy, and yet when you're looking up liberal websites, you don't really see that. The one instance which you did say you saw it was on the Occupy Democrats blog, that's just a propaganda machine for the left or for progressives. For you, do you actually believe that this was partisanship at play, or do you think it's just something wrong with the algorithm?
So it's really hard to say. I mean, I don't really think Google was conspiring and plotting to make sure only conservative outlets happen, but sometimes bias is subconscious. I mean, if people say, well, algorithms, they can't be racist, the algorithms, they can't be biased, but algorithms reflect the creators that created them, that designed the algorithm. So maybe it was subconscious, but the algorithms are very faulty, so it indicates that there's some kind of bias. Now, I don't know how malicious or nefarious it was, but sometimes algorithms are very sensitive, and when you input certain things into the algorithm and the equation, it can, even the smallest change can equate to a very big difference in how it applies to certain organizations. Sometimes it ends up being partisan.
When you look at the whole idea of fact-checking like this, I mean, does it annoy you? Because I generally take a position that we should fact-check absolutely everything, including the fact-checkers, and I feel like most people don't actually do that.
Yeah, we don't mind being fact-checked ourselves. We think all the journalism industry should hold each other accountable, which makes us all better and all more respectable in the eyes of the public. So I'm not upset about people trying to fact-check the Daily Caller News Foundation or the Daily Caller. I agree with you that fact-checkers should be fact-checking the fact-checkers. And we do that here at the Daily Caller News Foundation. We have a Check Your Fact, the title of the group that does fact checks, and we fact-check fact-checkers. I mean, put a fact, some people take them as gospel, as they're absolutely true, but that's not always the case. The same thing goes for Snopes, the same thing goes for the Washington Post. They're not always correct in their fact checks because just like algorithms, fact checks are liable to subjectivity and bias.
Well, yeah, and on top of that, it's also about what they're choosing to fact-check and what they're choosing not to fact-check, which has been a huge problem for a lot of these sites where it turns out they're always fact-checking conservatives, but they're never fact-checking liberals, or they're doing it at a ratio that seems to indicate to the reader, if you're not expecting this kind of bias, that, oh, well, conservatives lie all the time. Liberals, they never lie. There's only one fact-check there. It's like, no, because PolitiFact decided that they were only going to fact-check conservatives, and that could be a problem. So a fantastic report that you have in the Daily Caller, which people can find out right now. Don't Google Daily Caller, because then you'll get a little note that tells you that they're lying. Just go directly to dailycaller.com. I've been talking with Eric Lieberman, the tech and law reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation. Eric, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're listening to The Jason Rant Show.
When people get older, their health problems can get complicated, and your doctor doesn't have the time or the...
And a happy patient. I was feeling old and I thought it was my demanding lifestyle. I started feeling loss of energy and stamina. Having treated thousands of patients with low energy and sex drive and seeing them improve.